Hey kids, Professor Newberry here. Today I'm going to show you how to do the problem of to show whether the function g of x equals negative in parentheses x minus 3 cubed is even, odd, or neither. Now you might be thinking you can just look at this problem and see this 3 power exponent and be like, oh, it's an odd equation. Well, you're wrong. What you have to do and know and pre-write on your paper is to write the equations of even, odd, and neither. If it's an even equation, g of negative x when you plug in is going to equal g of x. And odd is going to be g of negative x equals negative g of x when you plug it in. And neither is going to be when you plug in g of negative x and it does not equal g of x or negative g of x. Now, that might seem a little complicated, but all you have to do is find a number that's really easy to plug in back to the original equation. So for this instance, we're going to use the number 1. Now, the problem is going to look like this right here, and you're going to plug in negative 1 back into this equation. So that's going to give you g negative 1 equals negative, in parentheses, negative 1 minus 3 cubed. Now, to go about solving this is this simple algebra. So we're going to plug in negative 1, which we did, and we're just going to solve the parentheses. So that's going to give us negative 4 cubed, parentheses, with the negative on the outside. Now, this is going to give us negative 64, because 4 to the third power is 4 times 4 times 4, that's a negative. So it's going to give us negative 64. Then we still have this negative on the outside, which is going to turn this into a positive 64. And so when you plug in g of negative 1, it's going to give us 64. So what we're looking for now is if the 64 is going to equal, when we plug in, negative g for x, or just when we plug in 1 instead of negative 1. So the next thing we're going to do is plug in just simple O1 and see what that gives us. So we're going to write the original function, plug in 1 for x here and here. So we have 1 minus 3 cubed. So now we're just going to solve what's in the parentheses here, the same as we did up here, which is plus negative. That's going to give us negative 2. And then negative 2 cubed, that's going to give us negative 8. Then we still have this negative on the outside, which is just simple algebra, and that's going to give us 8 as our final answer for when we plug in 1 back into the original equation. So g of 1 is going to equal 8. And since this is the main key, g of negative 1, which is g of negative x, that's the whole key to solving these problems. So when we have negative 1 equals 64 when we plug it in, that means it does not equal g of negative x, as which we found here. So g of 1 does not equal g of negative 1. So we know the problem is not going to be an even problem. So next, we have to find out if negative g of 1 is going to equal 64. So we plug in the rest of the equation, 1 minus 3 cubed. That's going to give us the same thing that we did out here, which is going to be 8. And then we have this negative on the outside, so we have a double negative out here. So we have the negative 8, then we have another negative. So we're going to add those together, and that's going to give us a positive 8. Now you don't even have to do this. You can just take what you got right here, which is 8, and then know it's going to be a negative number, or the opposite of what it was originally. So we have negative g of 1 equals negative 8. Now, that means negative 8 does not equal 64, which is the odd thing of negative x negative equals negative g of x. And since that is not true, the problem is not odd either. So what we do have is 64 does not equal negative 8 or 8, which is the same thing as writing g of negative x doesn't equal g of x or negative g of x, which is right here, and that is why the problem is neither.